everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. And wow, I'm with Reggie Johnson right there. We met, I marvel at this is my monologue, by the way. I model myself after Johnny Carson, but it's my Johnny Carson monologue. But we met, online, and there was a spark with Reggie, spark with me, and the work that he does. We had a couple of notes going back and forth, emails, and then we kind of honed in on this to do this interview, and the commonality and the shared passions were there. And I said to my wife right before we went on air, I said that to Reggie an hour ago. We've been kind of BSing for the last hour, talking stuff, and not sports, but a lot of heavy stuff.
Right, life,
Really
right?
heavy stuff. But I said to my wife, I am so looking forward to this. I'm so excited about this interview, and I am. So
Thank you for having me. It's been
oh
amazing.
yeah. So I'm officially introducing Reggie Johnson. He's a radio personality, a podcaster. He has Reg in Atlanta, ATL, and Just the Stats, those two podcasts, which I listened to at length last night, took notes. He thought that was funny. But
Very, very amazing.
So Reg in Atlanta and Just the Stats. So without further ado, how about some background, and we'll kind of lead up to what you're doing now, Reggie.
For sure. Well, thanks for having me on. This is amazing. I was I started born in Frankfurt, Germany. My father was in the military, and moved back to I was only there for a few years, so it's not like I speak any German or anything, Calvin. We moved back to Alabama when I was young, maybe like 6 or 7 or so. And then I moved to Atlanta and been in Atlanta for pretty much my entire life. About roughly 7, 8 years ago, we started a computer company with a friend of mine, and we're just doing like computer repair, selling used computers and stuff like that. Mostly repair though, Calvin. And then we moved out to Mississippi because that's where he was from. People always ask me this all the time. Why Mississippi? And I say, listen, understandable. Completely understandable why you would ask me that question.
No comment.
Yeah. People ask me, it's not exactly a vacation destination there, Calvin. I'll tell you that. So I was out there, and because he lived there before, and he was like, they don't really have any computers, stuff like that here. So I moved out there, and that was very nice. I ended up getting on a show called, talking to a guy named Greg Slotsky, who owned a station named Star 92.3 out there. I called Greg because people would come into my shop, and they would make super mistakes, Calvin. I'm going to give you an example of one. They would bring in their computer monitor, right? Bring in their monitor, and they would say stuff like, okay, I need you to work on my computer and see what's wrong. And I would ask them where their computer was at. And they were like, here it is. It's right here. And it'd be like a monitor. It'd be like a cable modem, like a wireless modem or something like that. And people thought this was their computer. They would be so embarrassed by these things and wouldn't want to ask any questions for fear of looking stupid. So I called Greg and I said, can we do something? Just a little tech something.
Oh, wow.
that enlightens people so they don't feel crazy like you. And I would just do basic things. It wasn't a very long show. We'd do like a few minutes, but it aired throughout the day. So it wasn't like a scheduled 9 to 10. So it aired all the time. So people would come to the shop. They would hear me on the show, and then they would come into the shop. So that was around 2014-ish. I moved back to Atlanta. My partner was running the shop, and I wanted to get into radio here, but I didn't feel like I had enough experience. I was like, I've only been doing radio for 1 or 2 years. I'm going to be competing with lifers here, trying to get on radio. And I talked to a friend. And he said, you should do a podcast instead. So that's when I started Reg and ATL. Just the Stats came shortly thereafter because I needed to do a sports. I'm just a sports fiend. So I had to talk sports, Calvin, with somebody. Eugene's been amazing in that capacity for me. So I started those shows, and fast forward to this year, about roughly 6-7 months ago, I started to want to go on other people's shows, Calvin, because it's one thing to be a host, right? It's another thing to go on other people's shows and then be able to discuss more things with other people and then things that they are interested in, stuff like that. So that led me to where I am here now on your glorious show here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We talked about how I got into this and the chemistry that we have. It's great chemistry. We discovered this, and again, I took notes. So let's dissect first what Reg in ATL. What you talk about. Listen, I listened last night to the first race and percent. It's heavy stuff you talk
sure.
about with Doug. And I got to tell you, I mean, I call it as I see it, but it had such a great flow to it, and a realism and an honesty, and a caring. So I listened and totally enjoyed. And I said it's got to be my mission. I got to share this with them. But you know, your talk last night. Well, so tell me some of the things. I mean, you had a whole bunch of podcasts. Some of the things you talk about on Regiment ATO.
So that show is a little bit about everything, Calvin. That's one of the reasons why I had to kind of like branch out and do other stuff, because I want to talk about a lot of stuff, and I feel like you can only have your show be about so much stuff. You know what I mean? Like I in order for me to limit it and still have an outlet to have the conversations I really want, is why I started being on other people's podcasts. My podcast will talk about it can vary from relationship stuff. We might talk about crazy news stories. I have crazy news stories that I want to share with people. So I'll do a segment called In Other News, and now we'll talk about different crazy news stories. And then we talk about like some of the heavier stuff, just cultural things, right? It's American life and stuff like that. So it tends to run the gambit, so to speak.
Okay.
And then of course the sports show is just a sports show, but Reg and ATL is about a lot of different subjects, but most of them have a kind of a cultural through line there, Calvin, you know?
Because you know, last night, I mean, you're talking about J.R. Tolkien. And if it's written in the book, then you got to do the movie according to what it's written in the book.
Yeah, I'm strong adherence to source material guy to a certain. I see perspectives on that, because that was talked about in the context of kind of the uproar of the diversity that you see in some of the newer shows based off of what he wrote. I try to sometimes, Calvin, when I listen to these things, I'm not very reactionary to them. I don't think, hey, people automatically being racist. Like sometimes they might have salient points, or they may be making solid points. So a solid point people have is the source material point is a solid point, because I'm very strong about adhering to it, whether it's comic book movies, whether it's video game movies, whether it's sci-fi movies. You know, no matter the person who wrote the book, I want their vision to be as close to the screenplay as possible. But when it comes to stuff like that, it's nuanced, because we're talking about dragons and elves and orcs and things of that nature, right? So it's kind of like wanting historical accuracy when you're dealing with orcs and elves and dragons and stuff like that is kind of crazy.
Yeah, you even mentioned Tom Cruise, Top Gun. People just want a movie to be entertained. That doesn't have to be a message. And
for sure. Sometimes you want the movie to detract from life. You know, you don't want your movie to remind you of certain things going on in life.
You want to kind of escape.
Yes.
You also said something very, again, I took notes because I'm crazy, but you know, I may be the first note taker of your podcast. I don't know if I am or not, but
you know, I've had a couple, but I feel like those people are way more prepared. So you're just a prepared guy there, Cal.
Well, I was taught very well. I was taught by the richest Italian in the world, Luxottica, to do this kind of stuff before you see someone, to research and to learn, and to do it right. And that ethic is still with me today. It's a great ethic. And he just passed, and actually I wrote his daughter-in-law, this $35 billion man. I wrote his daughter-in-law and son a lovely note, how much this man, not that I interacted with him, I interacted with the son, weekly for 25 years. So the stuff up here, but it taught me, it's a great lesson for young people. If you're going to meet, and I taught at Rutgers, and if you're going to meet someone and make a presentation, even whatever it is, at least learn. So that's why I
Very
do what I
interesting.
do. I take this business we're in, of podcasting, pretty seriously.
For sure.
And it's a wonderful new world. It's a brave new world. With your Spider-Man, is that like one of your favorite characters, or it's just?
I would say probably so. I'm a big Batman fan for the realistic nature of like Detective Comics. Like I'm a big fan of that. Like it has like the superhero part, but you also have the detective portion of it. So I really enjoy those. But Spider-Man would be a close second. I think that there's a certain reality that they both kind of share. Like, kind of Peter Parker dealing with like real life problems and stuff like that will kind of resonate with me.
Okay. As I told you, my son's a big comic book, huge comic book, and he got into comic books at a young age.
Me too.
And my wife, who was an elementary school teacher for a million years, she encouraged. She said, "Reading is reading," and so he read all that stuff. And
very true, though. By the way, very true.
Yeah.
Read something, kids.
Right. Reading is reading. It's part of education. It's learning. It's throwing stuff into this thing up here. So let's talk about the origins of just the stats, the sports stuff, because we're gonna dive into something I've been chomping at the bits to dive into, sports stuff. So how did that come up? So what came first? Reg and
ATL came first, and I did that, Calvin, for roughly a year before I did the sports show.
Okay. And so
just an outlet. I just needed an outlet for it, Calvin. Like I have to talk sports. Like I have to talk them. And stuff like whether it's the subject matter on Reg and ATL or just the stats, a lot of these are genuine conversations I'm already having.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So they're just genuine subject matter. And just the stats was just like, I needed somebody else to talk sports, because otherwise, if I had incorporated that into my show, it would have took over the show. Would have been all I discussed. So I ended up contacting Eugene, reaching out, and not contacting him specifically. I had like an open, I think I put an ad somewhere, and I had like open kind of like people come in, and they would call up and stuff. And Eugene is just who I like the most, and he's been consistently with me the entire time. Now I can imagine doing a sports show with anybody else, with how prepared he was, how we both had a respect for podcasting, respect for people's time, respect for the listeners' time. And that can be hard to come by, and people are just doing it as a hobby. You know what I mean? You got to respect the listeners' time, and try to give them the best show that you can. And he was a great partner of that. And Just the Stats has been pretty amazing as a result.
Well, it is amazing. I like I said, I love Eugene's, is he still in Central Illinois, or is he down in Georgia?
He is down here in Atlanta.
So, but his background is Central Illinois.
Well, yeah, and the thing is with Eugene, the good thing about him is we have pretty much very similar sports interests, and sometimes you just got to find that, right? Because you might have a person that's very much into tennis, and you might have a person that's very much into hockey, so it's hard to just kind of find somebody that kind of lines up with you, right? And this lined up very well. He's been down here in Atlanta. I know he's in Florida for a while, and has been in Atlanta, I think, for as far as he can remember, I want to say.
Okay. So listening to the podcast last night, I'm gonna make you laugh now. What is this thing you got against Utah State?
Did Alabama
play them?
Yes, they did. And there's so when you were talking college sports, right? And you're talking teams that are just going to play random teams, it was just such a mismatch. And I got frustrated with the fact that was their first game of the season. I'm like, the first game of the season should be a game that we all at least want, that's somewhat palatable to all of us, and we kind of want to watch it. But when you're bringing in a team like Utah State to play like a powerhouse like Alabama, I just knew there was no point to watching that game. Like, a foregone conclusion of who's going to win
I
it.
know. But on the other hand, there's always another hand.
For sure.
7, 8, 9 years ago, this monstrous school, Michigan, played Appalachian State, and Appalachian State beat them.
Man, I bet some people got fired after that, Calvin.
Yeah, that was huge, and they still talk about that.
bet.
It's like a marquee that such a small, obscure school can play a major school and beat them.
Yes,
and
unbelievable.
It changed their whole. They just beat somebody the other day, another upset. So this is a tiny, small little school that has an everlasting reputation of having knocked off one of the Power Five. So I have misgivings about schools doing what Alabama did. Playing. On the other hand, schools want to do that because they have their shot.
Yeah, because you never know. You never know, man. I mean, anything could happen.
It's called sport.
For sure.
No, you never know. So I love college football. And been going to Rutgers games for 25 years, loyal as they come. I use that to help me bond beyond dreams with my son. It became our life. It was a wonderful. You know what? If I would have had a daughter, I would have done the same thing. So I've tasted, and to me, there's nothing else like college sports. But I have my worries about this wonderful institution of college sports. I worry that what will be left in the dust is the SEC and the Big Ten. Comments about that?
So, I see college. It can happen. I think your worry is not unfounded, Calvin, because what you could definitely see, and I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. I've talked about this before in other places, that I could see there being like a conference system the same way pro sports have, where you have one conference where there's whatever they name it, and let's just use SEC, Big Ten as an example. You could have two major conferences that have like 15, maybe because it's college, maybe that expands to like 20, because a lot of your pro sports leagues have about roughly 30-ish teams. Maybe because it's college, you go 20-20. Maybe you can go more just to try to have more people in there. But I don't know how bad that would be for the college sport in general, but I do think where it would get left behind is the Utah States of the world. So these colleges, these smaller schools, Calvin, I think it would solidify what we already kind of see happening. Like, we see the writing on the wall, right? We already see it. It's kind of going there with some of your bigger schools leaving some of these other conferences and joining major conferences as it is. I think, though, at the same time, just like we're talking about the other side of everything, I do think at the same time we get more competitive matches because people will have to play these competitive matches. It's hard to get schools to play competitive matches because they don't want losses, Calvin. They don't want any losses. They're getting penalized heavily for 2 losses to pretty much have you out of the playoffs, right? If schools are forced to play each other, though, and then you're looking at the top teams, and all the top teams have 3 or 4 losses because they're playing each other all the time, then I think that you can get it to where your 1 or 2 losses or few losses will be more forgivable because everybody will have them because they're all playing each other. Right. That's why now, Calvin, we got to look at strength of schedule a lot of times when a team has an undefeated record, right? How many Utah States, not to pick on Utah State here, but how many Utah States are on that schedule? You know what I mean? Like, if you look at the schedule, and I'm playing all interconference, especially in the SEC now, because if SEC is playing other SEC teams, and you look at somebody else's schedule and they play maybe one SEC team the entire year, and they can pack their schedule with the Utah States of the world and be undefeated, then you're looking at the strength of schedule stuff, and it becomes calculus trying to figure out who's going to get into the playoffs. It becomes a situation like that. Do you feel like that's threatening Rutgers' situation? Because Rutgers is in the Big Ten, right?
Yep.
So their Rutgers is kind of already there, Calvin. I mean, I don't see them getting pushed out of there.
No, they're there. It's funny. they were in the Big East for a lot of years,
Hmm.
and I have proof of this. I observed the world years ago. I don't know, 15 years ago. I observed the world, and I watched things that were going on. They're totally unrelated to athletics, but I watched where Rutgers is in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I just watched that city um, kind of fixing itself up, um, capital improvements, and fixing the highway up and put another hotel in. And I started because sometimes I'm a bit of a cynic. I came out of the '60s. Grew up in the '60s. And there's a lot of stuff to be cynical about.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I don't want to go there, but so I'm saying something's happening. And then I called a friend of mine who's a major radio personality, and I said to him, I predict Rutgers is going to go into the Big Ten one day. And he said, how can you say
Interesting.
that? I said, I can't explain. I'm just saying they're going into the Big Ten. And a year or two later, they went into the Big Ten. So this radio personality thinks, to this day, he thinks I'm a genius. But I just saw things. Well, to me, I'm watching the world. I'm watching the tapestry of the world, of the athletic world, and how things are changing so rapidly. I mean, beyond rapid. It's business, and
Yes.
and we are Rutgers is in the biggest media market in the world. It's New York, and we're only an hour from Philly. So you're talking about New York and Philly, and
For
I don't
sure.
know, 50 million people living around here. That's a lot of it's a lot of people. So what a hell of a media market, and to tap Rutgers, because Rutgers is land grant school, and most of all the schools in the Big Ten are land grant. So I said, and research wise and academic wise, Rutgers is right there with anybody in that genre. I mean, we're the pharmaceutical drug company uh, capital of the world. I mean, there's a million drug companies here in New Jersey. I mean, you walk out your house and you breathe in and you're smelling something in the air being made. I'm
Mm.
teasing, but so I just thought it was a natural evolution 10 or 12 years ago, and it came true.
How
Uh,
have you guys? How has that been for the school? Because going to these bigger conferences, they promise a lot of things to these schools and how it might change things for them. I'm pretty sure it helps with recruiting in one way or the other. If you can be in one of these conferences, right?
it does help recruiting, and that's leading up to my next question to you, Reggie. But no, it does. But when we first got in for 3 or 4 years, we maybe won one game a year in conference. And we finally got Coach Shiano to come back, who I dreamed that he would come back, because we had some great teams back in 2006. We got up to ninth in country. Like, wow, this is
Oh,
great.
nice single digit
Yeah,
ranking. Uh-huh.
we were putting out tons of guys into the NFL. I mean, the entire New England Patriot defensive backfield came from Rutgers. It was like a wow. We were really putting out and doing great. Um, but it took Rutgers a few years. They weren't getting the full money benefit from being in the Big Ten. It took a few years to kick in. Although now they're taking USC and UCLA in 2024. Uh,
Interesting. That's seismic shift, man, and kind of leads to what we were talking about earlier. Like
yeah.
it's whether we want it to be or not, we might not want two conferences, but man, it's looking like there's an arms race here with these conferences.
By the
So,
way, it's exactly right. It's an
you
arms
know,
race. It is exactly an arms race. So, but now, Rutgers, they're soccer, they're field hockey, some of the best teams in the country. So
okay.
they're excelling. So my next question to you is, and it confounds me and it frustrates me,
Hmm.
because I wear this hat. That's my brand. But my question is, schools like Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, they have brands.
For sure.
And to me, case in point, Duke
Mhm.
basketball.
Yes.
Krzyzewski was coach there for 40, 50 years. An amazing coach. He retired this year.
It's gonna be
Uh,
interesting without him there. It's gonna be very
yeah,
interesting.
but what was interesting to me, and that's for me to try to comprehend what a brand is in college sports. So John Shire um, took over. He was the assistant coach. He used to play for Duke, so he became the coach. Even though everybody knew Krzyzewski is gone, Duke had the #1 recruiting class.
Hmm.
So how do how does Utah State beat that? A brand. They
Uh,
don't.
I think that's gonna be very difficult because there's only one way. It's one way to do everything in sports, and it's called win. You have to win. And what ends up happening here, and a team like let's use Duke as an example. A team like Duke, they win. So because they win, they get more television. Because they get more television, more people see them. Because more people see them, more people yearn to play there. It's like a chicken and egg situation here, Calvin. Like, and it's very hard to break that cycle. The only way that you can break that cycle is have as many television appearances, many playoff appearances. But here now is the problem. The problem is that team is stacked with professional players. A lot of these guys are playing at the next level. And you got to compete with that. And it's going to be very hard for you to do so minus winning, Calvin. Like you're gonna have to go and be that that team that goes beats in Alabama, or you got to be that team that can go out to Duke. And at least I don't know if people expect you to beat Duke, but can you give them a run for your money?
Right.
And I think where that comes from, Calvin, is signing that first domino. You got to get at least one guy. One guy. You don't need to have a whole team, but get one guy that can get you some kind of national attention. And then hopefully that one guy starts that process up for you where now you're on TV because people want to see the one guy, right? When you look at players like your Zion Williamsons of the world, right? We don't care where he plays at. He could have played at Utah State. He's going to be on TV. Like no matter where that guy played at, he's going to be on television. So I think that stuff like that, it starts. If you can recruit that one player, you're always one solid player away from kind of changing your fortunes, so to speak. But you got to be able to do it. And that's a lot easier said than done.
Right. So when Nick Saban finally retires, that brand is still gonna continue. Kind
For
of.
a bit. And if they start losing, it's going to be,
Okay. So
you're going to
winning
see it
is
start to
everything.
go
Right.
down slightly, right? And I think the same
Winning.
thing with Duke too. Basically what they're doing is that class they have now is still because of Coach K. Like it might not be that he went out and recruited himself, but because of his efforts, because of all that work he's put into it, Duke is already established. Now that will start to chip, I think, or be tarnished a bit if they start losing games.
So it's like that movie Rocky. Win, Rocky, win.
When you win,
Win,
it changes a lot of things
winning,
in sports.
winning is everything. So by the way, we could, it's funny. Before we went on air, I said, "How much time do you have?" And you said a few hours. Oh, that's great because we could. We're not going to go on for hours, and which means,
We could break it up into some more shows there,
yeah,
Calvin.
you have a standing thing. Come back anytime. You can come back with Eugene. You can come back with Doug, whatever. By the way, it's great ideas. I'm here. I'm a retired guy. I sit in this chair 12 hours a day, so I'm always around. We continue this stuff because we could just go on and on and on. So
For sure.
uh, my last tapping into your sphere is talking about NIL. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Very polarizing.
I'm actually sick about it. Uh,
Really.
and I know Nick Saban, said some things along those lines about Texas A&M
Mm-hmm.
um, buying a team.
Mm-hmm.
This is college sports, and we talked about it before we went on the air. I worry about it because once again, it's going to be the rich get richer.
Yes.
And so what were some of your thoughts about the future of NIL, which is name, image, likeness for those who don't know.
For sure. I like NIL personally, and I will tell you for a few reasons why. For one, it's because, you know, if these big schools and these coaches and everybody else can benefit off of, some of these kids come from abject poverty, and to see these coaches making 7 figures, right? And that's a lower paid. Like if you're a good coach, you're making 8 figures, right? So to see these coaches making 8 figures and going into a lot of these kids' home and saying what you're going to do for these people's children and all that other stuff, I like to see them get a piece of that economic pie, because it's definitely a large, and that college
Agreed.
economic pie has grown. So I like to see them get a piece of that pie. Another thing too here, Calvin, I'm not sure if you ever thought about this, but I think NIL can end up being the great equalizer, and I'm going to tell you why.
Wow.
I just told you before how I feel like winning is something that you got to do to break the cycle. Now along comes NIL. No, wait a second now. Can I pay for people to come to my school? Now, does it matter if they're on TV? So another school can say, let's say you're recruiting against Bama, and they can say, we win, we're on TV all the time, right? Utah State before NIL had zero chance, in my opinion, of actually competing, because you can't equal that. You know what I mean? Now, let's say that you have boosters, though. You have deep-pocketed boosters, and let's say they're from Utah State. Now that 5-star recruit that was definitively heading to Bama, heading to all these other schools, definitively Bama, Michigan, whoever they are, because you know the usual suspects. There's like 5 or 10 of these schools, and then it's everybody else. So if you're on the everybody else side and you got deep-pocketed boosters who are like, well, we'll pay for that kid to come here. Now that 5-star quarterback that was going to Bama and Bama only was on his short list, well, now Utah State, they might be on that short list as well now, because now we can pay the guy. That opens it up to all of us. It's a little bit more fair, in my opinion, because anybody can pay. You know, how deep the pockets are, you bring up a solid point there, Calvin. Like that's going to be differentiating factor. Like, you know, you might have deeper pockets over here and over there. But at the same time, I feel like you're a winning football team and you already have that going for you. You know what I mean? Like it's hard for you to just be Bama overnight, because you got to win as long as they've been winning. You got to have the legacy of the Bear Bryant, the Nick Saban. You know how legacy is in college sports. You got to have those legacies. And a lot of times those legacies are long set before you ever got there. So you're trying to fix that problem overnight. It's going to be difficult. But we can pay the kids the same thing you can pay them. We can pay them. We can match it. Right. You know, and now maybe we start to change the trajectory. Maybe games start getting more interesting, because now a Texas A&M can pay players the same way you can pay players. And a lot of these players are getting paid under the table anyway, Calvin. We're not even bringing that up, right? Like a lot of these players are already being paid.
I know.
But let's bring it to the light where we can all pay players. And I think things equalize a bit, because now that kid that you definitively had a few years ago before NIL, just because of the name attached to your school, that name was recruiting. Like just having the Alabama A, just being in Georgia, just being in Michigan, you're attracting schools just by existing. You're attracting players just by existing. Now that deep-pocketed boosters can also counter with the, okay, you can go to Alabama, but we're going to pay you $2 million to go to Utah State. That kid might say, you know what? Utah State's a school for me all of a sudden.
Yep, I like that. Interesting. I never thought of that, Reggie. You know, that it could level in some ways a playing field. Great stuff. Hey, this has been great stuff. We could go on and hopefully we will, because I think this is great. I marvel at the universe for connecting us, how these things happen. So please come back. Thank you for this, for your time. Truly, in the words of Clint Eastwood, one of his movies, you made my day.
Very nice, my friend. Yes, very nice.
You did.
Thank you for having me. Man,
so really we're going to sign off. Come back. Don't leave yet. I'm just going to close the recording. Thank you so much, Reggie. It's been great. Really.
It's been amazing for both of us, man. Thank you for having me, buddy.
Thank you.